Hello everyone, many thanks Mike for that kind introduction, and a big thank you to yourself and Oxford Books for inviting me to do this talk today. So as Maya has already said, I'm Al Bailey. I'm a documentary filmmaker and film festival programming director. I began my career in film as the co-founder of the Manchester Film Festival, and I've head programmed 19 international film festival editions to date. I directed my first feature-length documentary that was released by Lionsgate in 2020. I'm now the new artistic director at both the Oxford and Liverpool film festivals. I'm currently in pre-production of my second feature doc, due to start principal photography in late May of this year. So I'll stop blowing my proverbial trumpet and move swiftly on to today's talk, which is going to cover a truly independent path to take your idea for a documentary from the genesis to financing to production to post and hopefully to eventual sale. Literally covering the whole spectrum of hurdles that I have faced and hopefully highlighting how I managed to jump a fair few of those hurdles, and just as importantly, how I also crashed into a few. So fingers crossed that will result in a how-to guide for any first-time independent doc maker out there who's wanting to navigate the challenging landscape. There'll obviously be certain elements that I'm going to prioritise and others that I'll dedicate less time to, with the hope that the lesser covered areas spark more answered questions for you to ask me after the main body of the talk. I think it's paramount that I'm going to be talking for about an hour roughly, and point out that what I'll be covering is the independent route that I have taken personally on my first feature, and what I'm also putting into practice once again on my second. Now, this isn't a holy grail or definitive path of how to get your documentary made and delivered. What it is a realistic process of how you can achieve this in the big bad world of independent filmmaking without selling your soul to the devil on a yacht in Cannes or a ski lift in Park City, both of which are achievable, I understand, but only with the right personality and wallet size. But that's a completely different path and talk than the one that I'll be giving today. This path is for the self-proclaimed also-rans like myself who fail to get on that yacht and our pre-mentioned ski lift, and who have an idea for a documentary and are completely overwhelmed by the obstacles in the way, not only to produce it, but also deliver it to an audience. So, like all good stories, aside from Pulp Fiction and numerous others, let's start at the beginning of the process, the idea. Ooh. There we go. Now, there's a million one processes and methods you can choose to explore to ignite your creative fires, and a million one more courses, etc., and structure and so forth. And again, that is most certainly not this talk. That's a whole other talk. So if we concentrate purely on the landscape of documentary film for the purpose of this first step, and just gear our minds, even at this early stage, on selling, and see that the market is bursting at the seams with content. So what if we concentrate purely, we need to ask ourselves in the creative process, how do I make anyone care about my idea in this high volume environment? Now, as mentioned, I'm going to use my past and current projects to illustrate each of the points I'm going to cover. So indulge me a little if you can allow me to put my tongue firm in my cheek. And imagine me skipping with high knees through a creative meadow with a daisy in hand as I breathe in the fresh air idea of helping my friend find new love after the death of his wife. So one skip and a thought, and I have a premise. As I said, how you get to that first initial idea is a whole other exercise book of tips and revelations. But back to the example of that idea of a premise. Help my widowed friend find a new love. Simple, definite premise. First hurdle completed. The next barrier is going to touch you a little bit more, and that is tackling that original point of who will care. Now, without damning the human psyche and soul too much, you have to, at this stage, certainly when exploring ideas for commercially viable documentary films, is rest all those romanticized impulses and assume that everyone out there has a heart colder than a Rocky Balboa's training abattoir. Now, as a side note, don't allow this mindset to cross into your everyday life, as it won't go too well. But just for the purpose of this method, switch on those cold outlooks and look at the premise and goal of your initial idea, and be as brutal as your soul will allow you to be, because if you aren't at this stage, then somewhere further down the line, it's going to be costly. So enough negative talk, and let's get proactive on how to make people care about my premise by using the example idea in my debut feature, DTF, I want to help my widowed friend find love. Right, remember at this stage, we can't afford ourselves not to be calculated. So now we have to massage and expand our idea by making those cold-hearted people care. And we do that by adding some stark branches of interest. We do this with looking at the fundamental process of documentary filmmaking, and that is research. Now, that's a word I'm going to use again and again right the way through this entire process. Research the basics of the premise and the subject matter. That will give you those branches of interest that will find and engage people to care about your documentary. So example time once more. Let's get some depth to my premise by delving into those initial details of research, and you'll hopefully see how it grows. So my widowed friend was a pilot. That's the first seed. That seed makes me want to water that fact and research the airline industry. Now, at the time of the development, I discovered that there were 9.9 million people working directly within the aviation industry. So immediately I have a cold-hearted numbers that point me to a demographic that could be interested in certain themes of my documentary. Now, as creative and as good soul as we are in the storytelling profession, when it comes to independent film and all that comes with it in terms of finance and risk, we simply can't afford to ignore numbers. 9.9 million was more than enough to steer my subject towards a certain audience who would care, or at least would be interested in that early premise stage. Now, once you find that large number like this, don't think that's it and off I go and make a film. The idea is to find as many seeds as you can to cement your documentary as something that will appeal and sell. So I had 9.9 million people that would be interested in the professional lifestyle of my subject. So what else? So more research, that word again tells me that there are 6 billion airline passengers worldwide every year. Well, maybe not over the last 12 months for obvious reasons, but fingers crossed those dizzying numbers when the world starts to turn again. So those were crazy numbers that I knew I had to concentrate on and narrow down to make a more specific target audience of the documentary. So in the example, we now have a widowed airline pilot looking for love and a massive demographic attached to air travel. So how do we appeal to as many of those 3.6 billion as possible? We look at the premise again and research the remaining content, and that's looking for love. Now, how do a vast percentage of people looking for love in modern age was the next question, obviously, and that being internet dating and in particular, Tinder. Now, if you can find a brand within your target premise, then this will be an added bonus further down the line for not only investors, but eventual sales. But please, please don't get obsessed with trying to find one. Let it come organically within your research if it's there. As if it's not there and you shoehorn one in, it can have a detrimental effect on the overall work you're trying to produce. Now, again, at the time of research, Tinder alone have 50 million active users a month. Again, hard statistic that added to my incentive to broaden the premise with added thematic detail that will add value to the development of the documentary. So, with a tiny example of this research, we now have a widowed airline pilot looking for love via Tinder. Now, my ears are burning with filmmakers like this and saying, why so commercially calculative at this idea stage? And being an indie film festival program, I completely get that reaction as a committed advocate of producing powerful social and possibly less commercially attractive projects. I'm very similar to the million one examples of creative process and methods out there. There's also in equal measure numerous avenues to pursue in order to develop, finance and produce non-commercial documentary films, which again is another hour's worth of talk that will conflict, to be honest, much of what I'm going to cover here. We should all aspire, obviously, to make documentary social relevant, but we are concentrating on this particular talk, giving your documentary the best possible chance to see the light of day in the most independent fashion possible. So what you have to remember with this route I'm showing you is that we have that commercial appeal to make this happen. We're not relying on charitable or government funding, which can be amazing, but as we all know, aren't that easily accessible to the masses and also runs like myself, which brings us to neatly on getting the project financed. Now, taking your idea, fully developing it so you can present it to prospective investors. This section is going to command a large portion of the talk simply because the actions to be carried out at this stage will not only turn your idea into physical reality, but also you'll find the important elements right the way through the project's entire journey to final film. So before we attend chance meetings, events, festivals, sends copious amounts of emails to get eyes and ears on project, which I'll touch on a little later, we need a presentation, not a patter at a party, but a truly comprehensive physical and or digital document that will help clearly define your documentary to interested parties. The presentation becomes like your IKEA assembly manual. It's that important. I didn't even want to belittle it with a comparison of any religious books in print. It really is your be-all and end-all when trying to get some momentum for your project. So let me introduce you to my current project, Cage Cat, the Pilates Discovery. And what I'm going to do is illustrate the process by guiding you through the formation important document. To cover the aesthetics very briefly, firstly, it can be digital like this, which certainly fits well in our current climate in the last 12 months, or physically like this one, the DTF original work entitled Tinder Scout, which I'm going to come back to shortly to briefly compare and highlight one specific mistake I've learned in the time between the two projects. So back to Cage Cat. And the second point on aesthetics, which is design. Once more, I'm not cramming any rocket science enlightenment here, but work with the designer if you can. Who knows what they're doing as you're working in the visual art industry, and a badly laid out presentation that's hard on the eye is only going to reflect badly on you, the filmmaker. So reading into it a little bit more just on this first page, working title, be smart. And again, with that cold calculating head on, make it sellable to the investor. Get your keywords in the title in terms of your demographic. The Pilates discovery in this project are its sell words. Remember, this doesn't have to be your eventual title your distributor will end up with. It's all about your target audience, at this stage, and that is the investor. I'll scroll through the document now and point out maybe obvious elements and other non-obvious, and hopefully we'll get some pointers. So we've done the title. What are you making? You can see there, feature documentary. Seems obvious, but needs to be there so the person reading knows exactly what are you wanting to use their money to make and deliver. Your production company, install confidence. If you don't have one, then you're going to need one. So get those creative juices flowing again and come up with a name that represents your film as a possible one-off company that will house the financial and business cares of your project. If you're not business-minded, then either learn how to be, or as in all indie film setups, surround yourself with like-minded collaborators who share your vision, but not necessarily your skill sets. Versatility is the key. Whether we like it or not, we can't all deliver to the high standards that are always needed. So collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. So you're making a documentary, so straight away, you need to concisely inform what topics you are addressing or capturing for the audience. Clean and concise at this stage. Don't go too early with a detailed and passionate story information, as this can feel too much like a vanity project to most investors. Once you've got a clear mind of what your topics are, then illustrate the demographic audience of those interested in the stated topics. As mentioned in the creative process, it's so important, particularly in the documentary genre, to precisely target your audience. You need pinpointed topics with certain appeals. Now, once you've been shown the investor that there's a healthy audience for the topic, it's then that you can divulge the story. Now, this should be the sweet point of proceedings for all creatives. The first thing to look at and concentrate on, though, is that the short synopsis comes first, because although this is the time to divulge and map out your ideas to prospective investors, it's also time to pull the reins in slightly on how much information you want to present to someone who has literally just opened your presentation. Now, in the festival programming world, I see this on an hourly basis where you come to submissions and the director's written 3 pages of a flowery statement of intent. Now, an investor or an even eventual audience is no different than a tired programmer. When they first look at something, they need to engage first, whether that be with visuals or, in this instance, a concise blurb that is brief and to the point. If the short synopsis bores them, they will not read on the detailed storyline or treatment. So grab them with the short synopsis first and don't deliver the full story outline until they clearly and quickly understand the short, concise description of your documentary. Now, the reader has either gained interest or they've lost interest, depending on whether the short synopsis appeals to them or not. It's also worth pointing out that not everyone is going to be drawn to your idea, no matter how great it might be. So to reiterate the point, keeping the initial synopsis abbreviated saves time, not only for the investor, but also time for you, find more suitable suitors to your project. So they've either put the presentation in the bin or they're more interested than they were 60 seconds ago. Now, this is the point where you respect the fact that someone is interested and engaged in the possibility of investing large sums of money into what is at the minute just an idea on a document. So respect that thought of that interested individual and put in maximum effort with your story outline for the documentary. Not only because the investor is now interested enough to read a more detailed outline of the story, but also this written format will give you an excellent foundation of information for future reference resource in delivering a solid documentary. And I want to come away from this story outline before we read on, as mentioned, try and illustrate a lesson I learned the hard way. So we see pretty much quite a detailed bulk of text for Cage Cat to take you through a perceived plan of the documentary. And then we come to this, which is the hard copy of the DTF, which we saw the cover of earlier. Now you can see within the yellow marked area, the lack of text or story outline in comparison to Cage Cat. Now, it's irrelevant what it says. With complete honesty, it's clear to the eye that there isn't nearly enough depth in this segment. Now, as investable as DTF was, and it was clearly successful in getting that investment, but as a fledgling documentary filmmaker, I fell into the trap of number one, being lazy, and number two, insisting on my belief that a documentary shouldn't be mapped out and wanting to create a documentary feature that was shot as a fly on the wall, raw from the hip, letting the subject lead us, and let's see what we get. Now, That's all well and good to have this fly by the seat of your pants ethos, but it's high risk. And that is something we're trying to minimize within this talk today. So from my own personal experience, I advise anyone looking to make an independent documentary to stay clear of high risk methods. Now, it sounds contradictory, given that we financed and eventually sold DTF, which is no mean feat, but we came out with something of an out of car control crash that, yes, got my foot in the door to progress in documentary filmmaking, but it was also naive and placed myself in precarious situations, not only within the filmmaking process itself, but also with investors who trusted me with their money. Now, the documentary is not for everyone, it offends some, but for those that have not seen it, it's almost a lesson in itself, to the point of I'm trying to make, that without detailed research that I'm showing in the caged cat example, then you're leaving yourself open to risks you really don't need or should be tackling. Now, I tackled those risks and managed to craft something that was sellable, but that's again not what we're talking about. It's about giving you the best possible chance from the get-go. So hopefully learning from this mistake, we can now see I've evolved to reduce certain risks with a more in-depth outline planning of this project. So back to the story outline. Now, you might say, fundamentally, I agree with the method of taking a risk and leaving the subject matter lead within the documentary genre. Like myself, learn or evolve from mistakes. But what I'm trying to get across is to essentially understand the main craft of developing an indie doc. And that is by taking maybe a leaf out of the fictional narrative method book, and see that in terms of your story, you should always be pre-planned. And with a doc, by asking questions and answering them with a preordained idea of what you will find. Your answers may well be off the mark, and that's fine. But investors need to know and understand clearly what you're trying to achieve. And without planning and developing, then it'll result in a directionless piece, rather, which might not sell. Now, all this predictive calculation being said, it's also important to contradict that initiative with the understanding that your plan with a documentary may take you down different paths than the ones you predicted. And as documentary filmmakers, we should embrace those deviations, because it adds both interest and, more importantly, conflict to your story. And I believe personally that a documentary story should always have this challenge with its process, as it will always intrigue the viewer and then get them into engaging more. So as you see in this paragraph with the asterisks at the top there underneath the short synopsis, I attempt to plan out the story as much detail as possible. I also state that because of the nature of the documentary, our subject may lead us to answers we didn't expect, and these answers will more often than not enrich the project in its final form. It's just a good side note to have for the investor, know that you've covered all bases in what you're trying to explain. Now, for those that wish to multitask, while I ramble on, you will see that I've created information by working backwards, giving a clear understanding of what you would like your conclusion to be. Because without doing it, it makes it extremely difficult to map out, obviously, and add those additional branches for your story to grow organically off the original spine or question of your doc. Now, again, I'm not saying it's impossible to come out with a great fly-on-the-wall documentary that's skillfully edited. All I'm saying is that from my recent experience, I believe this will once again give you the best chance in creating a project that is soundly investable and will deliver what you propose to deliver to your valuable investors and eventual audience. Hopefully, I say valuable investors because they're valuable and can be extremely rare. And once you find someone who's confident in your ability with any form of independent film finance, then you want to treasure them and deliver in the most complete way you can, from this pre-investment stage right the way through to delivery. So if you haven't already been reading, as I've been waffling on, then don't worry too much, as I'll publish my contact email for you. Anyone wanting to look at anything I showed today in more detail, then please feel free to contact me. You can have any further questions and points you want to raise after fully reading all the content, and you can fire away. Hopefully I'll facilitate those questions with some definitive answers. It's also good to remember that even after investment, when you're well into production, this plan will become more developed and detailed, and further questions and conclusions will grow. And that's where a good idea could possibly become a great documentary, as it forms broader and groundbreaking answers. That, I suppose, is hopefully where the gold dust lies. Right, okay, moving on just to further down that little page we've got there. You've delivered your story, so all you want to do now is get a concise section of your history, of your subject matter. This doesn't need to be details. You're only really producing information you or anyone can research, but it certainly needs to appear to show your investors you have a clear understanding of the main factual information you're wanting to document. A good comparison would be, say, delivering a narrative biopic. You would need information on who your biopic was about, same as the history of the subject matter in this documentary. Once you've delivered that concise history, then how are you connecting that history to the story you are wanting to deliver? Which we say there from Joseph to ours, which ideally brings us on and connects the reader to the sizzle reel. Now, the traditional use of the sizzle reel is to tell your story via other directors as images. Now, this is extremely common in fictional narrative projects and can be done within documentary, although slightly more difficult to do in its full narrative. What we've done here is produce something with a personal touch that discusses our planned conclusion of the piece rather than the entire story outline. We're trying to condense our planned template into 10 minutes would have been a visual information overload, really. So ideally, the sizzle reel's main objective is to relay style, theme, and feel to the investor. So considering this project's many elements, we felt it would be more effective to concentrate on what we see as our main hook for investors and audience alike. So not the entire doc on this delivery, it was more the final destination, as it were, implementing Pilates with a prison environment to test the practice capabilities. Right, now, ideally I'll play the sizzle reel for you here, but with bad experience of modern technology, the idea of playing it smoothly for everyone via a Zoom link is probably too much to expect. So rather than 70% of you watching a jittery screen for 10 minutes, what we'll do is just scroll through some images and suggest that if anyone is interested in seeing any video content that I publish today within this talk, and also the pre-mentioned text you may not have been able to read so quick, then please feel free to drop me an email and I can forward links to you to watch in your own time. And again, to help you spend some time answering any questions at a later date in regards to sizzle reels and trailers, etc. Which the trailer I will cover a little later on when we get to it. So there's the email there, ala@optif.com. And let's take a quick note of that. Now, the next section is definitely something that is particularly important in the independent documentary world, and that is contributors, how to get them and how and why you should include them at this stage in your information. Before we get to the contributors, you'll notice separate the information with strong images that, again, stylistic approach to the project just reiterates that to your investors. Okay, firstly, you need to sell each contributor, including yourself and other producers of the film, as much as the project itself, as contributors are vital for investors. They can see and calculate value from them as they were an actor in a narrative or an indie film, say. The more high profile, the more value you have. Now, just because someone or something is valuable, it doesn't always mean they're suitable for your project, as unsuitability can quickly depreciate value in this case. It's worth comparing on this, say again, a suitably cast actor in an indie narrative is the same as a suitable contributor in a documentary. The only difference being is having expertise or shared themes to your subject matter in the latter, rather than being a correct archetype for a narrative character in the former. There's nothing worse, obviously, than a badly casted actor, and also nothing worse than a randomly inserted celebrity within a documentary who has no little tie into your story and or subject matter. As you can see, each collaborator's detail with information, two important aspects. Firstly, their expertise and suitability. Secondly, their profile in terms of prospective reach to help with eventual marketing. Now, another detail we'll notice is confirmed, which we have there, stroke featured, and the separately listed proposed. Never state you have confirmed stroke featured contributor when you haven't. It's so common within indie film presentations that are delivered to serious investors and producers claiming high profile contributors attached to the project when they aren't. Investors break through that and they'll ask for emails and all sorts before any money is invested. So always be transparent and list as proposed, as we can see there, and featured and confirmed there. So in terms of how we reach out and get contributors attached to independent projects with no initial money, the same rule applies, which is transparency, and then add a bit of passion with a sell with confidence, and importantly, an angle to the people you're approaching. Now, it's not easy gaining high quality contributors without a bank full of money. Generally, contributors, or more unfortunately, their agents know their value, again, just like actors. This is where hard work, persistence, and that word again, research, plays another strong part in making everything work. Let's take, in this case, Wim Hof, for example. I literally went fishing with the correct tackle and bait. This was put together, firstly, visiting his branded website and reaching out via the contact page. Extremely lucky, I grant you, but you don't do enough fishing, then you will not get your rewards. But what's really crucial, though, when you do this, is to completely sell it upon first contact, as you won't get a second chance. What's your angle? What will appeal to them and or their organization in connection with your topic? All this is gained by prepping with research and then delivering that research in a palpable tone to them on first contact. This, again, can be highlighted with John Howard Steele. Now, not to have read his book, Caged Lion, or not studied Wim Hof's methods before content would have been negligent of me. Seems an obvious point once more, but there are vast amounts of excitable filmmakers out there who literally just contact people without putting the time in to research the individuals they're approaching. And I then left really wondering why their efforts fall on deaf ears. So put the work in before and it'll be worthwhile. Remembering persistence and patience are probably the other key words here. So looking at some other attached contributors here, we look at Rebecca Adlington, for instance, was a completely different case. It was a different tact in regards to attaching her. This came about utilising contributors we already had involved and building on them. As basically Chris, our exec producer and Pilates professional, has many high-profile clients, so that gave us obvious angles and connections to explore. But again, you still have to make your project appealing and appropriate to them with the same rules as before. Don't just rely on acquaintance and personal connections to seal the deal. This section really is all about building the bricks of your project in terms of making it possible on your idea and absolutely maximizing everything you can from your subject matter. Just to finish off on the contributors segment, we have further proposed contributors. Now, as long as there is validation on why you want to approach these contributors, then include them. It shows ambition. Not to put any in would show a lack of confidence in the project completely. Now, some might say don't be too unrealistic and overly ambitious, as you may run the risk of not being credible. But if you're solid enough in everything you've planned and presented thus far, then I personally see no reason to be afraid of approaching anyone suitable for your project. Basically, aim for the stars, I'd say, and you've got a chance of knocking the roof off. Aim for the coffee table and you're not likely to get off the floor. It's probably the best thing to kind of think about this when faced with the task of attaching high quality contributors to your documentary. So on we go. And as you see there in that half of the screen, I don't want to enlarge it too much, you won't be able to read it all. Comparable documentaries. Now, another essential piece of information to illustrate and present. If you're coming to an investor with a piece so original that there is nothing to compare to it in past markets, then I'd suggest that 99 times out of 100, your project will not be sellable. If you feel there is nothing to compare, then this could be a game changer in your development stage, and not in a good way. Nothing comparable, then think again, would be my personal motto. To say your documentary has comparable titles doesn't mean your idea isn't original. It doesn't mean it's a copy, so don't be afraid to allow yourself to compare, as all that it means is that there are elements of your film that have something in common with other successful documentaries. Now, I say successful documentaries, make sure you use successful comparisons. Investors for these types of projects we're talking about here aren't interested in documentaries that don't sell. Now, again, I'm as big a fan of any of the docs that are socially engaged or informative with very little commercial projects. But this talk, reiterate once more, isn't about those films we're discussing. Producing our own commercial viable documentaries is a completely different talk and is also subjected to what is or isn't commercially viable. So I promise to stay clear of that conversation and muddy the waters somewhat. So back to the tech. We've kept it simple, no facts and figures. Now, some may include box office here like we did with DTF, but what I would advise, and that I've learned, is to keep statistics and figures in your separate finance package purely for clarity, which we've done with Cage Cat and I'll move to shortly. Once you've delivered all this information that we've gone through, then ask yourself to think outside the box. Is there anything extra incentive to the investor? This may not be possible for every project. And if you can't find one with yours, then it's not the end. As long as you've made your presentation strong, clear, and concise, then the film itself alone should stand you in good stead with any experienced film financier. Now, to give us an extra appeal to maybe a slightly less experienced film financier or ones that are nervous of high-risk investment like independent film is, we in this instance did think out the box and found further angles and incentives with a book and fitness content offer, which just adds stability to a financial plan, which I'll touch on in a second. So just to finish off this particular document before we move to the finance talk, we chose to finish the presentation with some brief information on the budget, production line, and contact details, which is an obvious and standard thing to expect. Just a note to make here, and that is to make the budget and timeline as accurate as you can. Otherwise, you will end up having to explain to certain people certain things you don't want to be explaining. Now, if we move on to the finance package, I'm not going to hone in on too much for third-party privacy reasons and only display a couple of selected pages of the document that is roughly about 20 pages long. But what it should do is give you a broad visual outlay of what it should look like. So the investor is liking what he or she reads in terms of the creative plan. You've found someone or some people who are interested enough to look at the important figures. Again, to repeat the previous point, I strongly suggest you keep this separate from the original presentation. The idea first, then present the figures and financials clearly. If you can't add up, then once more, find someone who can. As stated, making any film is commonly seen as a collaborative effort. The finances are no different. Have zero hold whatsoever and protect the initial investment with as many expert resources as you can. With this project, we've chosen merchandise opportunities. There are many more incentives you can possibly offer financially that a good financial professional can recommend to you. So before you present an offer, get their advice and include what is relevant to your project. Be realistic as you possibly can with your projections. You either your past experience from your last project, or if you don't have one, look at those comparable titles, medium, success, and not so good. And please make sure you are comparable though, because again, a lack of research here will sink you in terms of investment. Almost everyone that you'll engage with at this level will be aware of the risk involved. So strip away that high risk with realistic methods of protecting the investment, delivering prospective gains, produce a realistic timeline from investment in the bank right the way through to your investors seeing their returns come in. The main point to take away from the financing expert aspect of this is to realize that it's really important that you sit down with people with experience and map out a detailed and sound plan. And once more, it's all about finding the right people that'll harpoon back with the go fishing tactic, either virtually or physically, and be that people's person, which brings me to meeting the right people. Now, you're sitting there listening to me thinking, I have no budget, so what do I offer to these so-called right people that I'm going to surround myself with off the back of, or even before actually a pre-presentation that maybe I've not even produced yet? So let's take it right back to the blank page of the presentation document, just for example's sake. It's always better to have money. That's the reality. And with it, you can make projects and people move far more quickly without it. But we aren't all unfortunate enough to have those rich friends or relatives who will feed your creative desires. So what can you offer the pauper filmmaker that you are? What can you explore to get people involved? Now, as previously discussed, for example, let's take it right back to the design of your initial brochure. What can you offer a designer to do your brochure in the first place with no money to offer initially? Now, I say initially because everyone wants paying. The idea at this early stage, though, is to obtain certain services in exchange for money and a job to be paid out of the initial budget you're in the process of trying to obtain. So, Mr. and Mrs. Designer, would you design the titles and credits and or initial sales poster? I'll pay X, Y, and Z, which will be within your budget once you have it, and maybe a few points share on the back end of the brochure work. Now, the same can be said with financial experts. Offer them work off the back end of the budget coming in. You'll need someone to count the money at the end of all this. So just be smart, transparent again, and be a likable person the best you can with an interesting and well-researched project. You'll actually be amazed how much quality help you can acquire to get this far with the initial presentation. But remember also, it is on you to deliver. So be prepared to take that pressure on your shoulders with your calculated promises, with that hard work, some smart ideas that you'll deliver to them. People have helped you along the way. So you've acquired that small A team to prepare a presentation, but after backtracking a little again, how do I now move things forward and get ears and eyes on my presentation? Again, all we are now doing is beginning our above actions with even more guts and confidence, and that means network, network to network. Festivals, events, again, in modern times, maybe virtually, but fingers and toes crossed, ideally physically. No different than fishing for contributors. Hard work and the ability to research and go and meet and engage with people. Again, if you can't do this, repeat myself, either learn how to do it or find someone to work with who can. Because if you can't do this, you can have the best ideas in the world, but all you will ever become is a bedroom filmmaker. The bottom line is that getting an independent film off the ground from scratch is a people's business. Now, certainly at the finance stage, the majority of investors will invest in the people as well as the idea. So again, research who you want to approach. Don't worry, you're not a stalker. Research festivals worth attending, events worth attending, research should always come before network. Now, in regards to festivals and events, you don't have to have a short film in a festival towards getting to meet people, although this is an avenue worth venturing into if you're coming from a zero production background. So calculate the expense of a decent short doc to get your foot in the door. And if it is viable for you, then it's always the preferred way in. But always make sure with this added expense that the events and festivals you're aiming to go to are attended that people can help you. That is vital. Do not waste your time and little money you may have sipping an expensive glass of wine you can't afford surrounded by people in the same boat as you. Now, in the current climate, again, you're all thinking, well, this isn't possible at the minute, and online events jump to offer the same level of opportunities, and you are right. There's no skating around this, the same as it's not really that viable to be shooting full-on travel documentaries at the moment. But this just brings me briefly to touch on the current times, which I know is a general consensus for these particular talks with Oxford Brooks. We're all looking, obviously, for genius ideas to work in these current conditions within this industry. All I can confidently say is that the only thing we can 100% do without trying to reinvent the wheel that I'm certainly not qualified to do, is prep, prep, prep. Now, maybe somewhat cynical, realistic opinion, I don't believe there is a definitive answer to how to carry everything out to its maximum in the current situation the world finds itself in. Now, there may well be intellectuals out there far more intelligent than I within the industry who are on a mission to pioneer and hopefully a more hybrid offering that will allow more accessibility via technology may occur as a positive from these difficult times. But if we strip all the overthinking and finding that how answer and are completely honest and realistic, then our only concrete solution for indie doc filmmakers in the not so real world at present is to get on with what you can, not what you can't. Everything I've covered thus far is going to take you months, so get on with it. If it's still not possible to meet and shoot and present, then without losing too much focus, the best you can do is move on to the next project and the next one. Why not build a portfolio of great presentations to present? That's really kind of all I've got to say in terms of working within documentary in this current climate. We can all have initiatives. We like to help make things better, but unless I'm missing something, then all we can do is plan at the minute. And that, in my book, is what we should all be doing. So back to it. You have researched your heart out. You've networked your heart out, whether on Zoom in our current situation, which, by the way, is more difficult, but still possible. So do it. You have gone through a million rejections. Be prepared for that. Eventually, somebody says yes. You work with your finances, get the money in place with the help of your producers, and you're ready to go. This is the dream. And it's a possible one. With hard work and following a clear process, you can achieve it. So we've got the money and we're ready to go in production. This is maybe somewhat surprising, the shortest section of the talk, actual production, because the same rules and tips kind of apply and repeat it again and again. Surround yourself with efficient, like-minded people you can work with and trust. If they share your vision in every department, from camera, sound, edit, etc., then you will not go wrong. Remember to be as efficient with your research in your production team as you were with getting the project to pre-production stage, because you don't match that, then you can potentially waste all that hard work. If you've prepared well, then you're going to produce well. There's no different in independent documentary. Follow the plan, take control. It's something I learned with DTF. If you haven't prepared enough, then the control will be lost. And that's what a hard lesson is, to learn how to fight back that in the edit room because of that, which I've mentioned is completely the wrong way around. So make sure you get more than you need, roll the punches from pre-production to post. That's genuinely all I want to say in terms of actual productions. With documentary film, it's all so varied and diverse that I'd be wrong to start lecturing on the definitive ways to shoot and produce. Aside from what I've stated, I generally don't believe there is a definitive process other than kind of heeding advice like the road is rocky and be prepared for the bumps the best you can. The same can be said, just touching on post-production. It's a long road and no definite right or wrongs to take. Just make sure you've got control of the wheel and you've got some great navigators holding the map. So we've shot and produced what we as a team feel is our top-notch documentary, and you've had 1,000,001 opinions that have been mixed into your mindset to deliver what you now think is your final piece to try and sell. So welcome to the shark pool. Swim safely. Right. Before we try to decipher the Jawses from the Bruce characters in the dangerous waters of sales agents and distributors, let's remember again that we aren't in the 1,000,000 to 1 category of obtaining that miraculous pre-sale deal with a big-time distributor who's in the lap of Netflix. And even though we have now made a film and we're feeling special and rightly proud of this achievement, we still now need to take that independent and realistic mentality that has got us this far and implement it into the cutthroat process of selling an independent film, and now in a particular case, a documentary. First up, without that pre-sale deal, then no one is going to package, promote, and sell your film other than you. It's a stone cold fact. The presumption of having a final film that people are more interested in than you are, the filmmaker, is absolute Looney Tunes thought process. Essentially, you may have actually already signed with a sales agent and even obtained a distribution deal. Even at that point, guess what? No one is going to package, promote, and sell your film better or other than you. Now, this might sound startling that once you have a distribution deal, that it's still down to you to sell your film. And legally, it isn't, because you've literally signed your rights away to the distributor. But unfortunately, in the climate of independent film, and in particular documentary, you have to presume the sales agent and or distributor are going to do as little as possible to make money on your film. And again, this sounds like a ludicrous statement. As we all know, the more the film sells, then the more everyone concerned will make. And on the face of it, that's correct. But in the current murky world of film distribution and sales, you need to be aware that a majority of distributors and or sales agents have large portfolios of content where your doc is maybe just a number supporting the golden egg that they may have at that time. If you are the golden egg, then start the cartwheels now. But even if you are, it's still vital that you presume you're not, and just take those next steps as if you just scraped into number 10. So how do we combat these issues? First up, test screen. Now, you may think you have the perfect cut with all the eyes you may have had on it this far, but remember, it's down to you to sell. So all you can do to ensure that is get the best possible cut to sell. There are various ways you can test screen depending on your budget. We utilize festival connections around test screening with a vast demographic and took questions and requested questionnaire feedbacks for DTF. Now, I'm fully aware that everyone will have an inroad into festival screening, so all the options are to screen, hire and collect a mixed demographic of people to watch your film for free. In any of these examples, you need at least 50 people for it to be worthwhile. So a venue that is large enough to house even just a basic audio and film is another option. On an even tighter budget, and perhaps in this day and age, probably more efficient, will be to remote screen for people to watch securely online. If this is your option, then deliver it as a live party format so you can physically see reactions live and make sure people engage fully with what you're trying to achieve. Once you've received honest and impartial feedback, then go back and edit time and time again to rectify if needed before you present to any sales agent, distributor and/or festival programmer. And our initial test screening was eye-opening with the nature of our documentary being kind of a risque expose. It was important to see these reactions and thoughts from a moral standpoint before we delivered. And even in hindsight now, the documentary still met with controversial reactions even after we diluted footage to cover us legally. So it's important with documentaries, with any kind of controversial content, that you must go through this process. So you have what you conceive as your final sales edit. Now get your legal checks out of the way with an entertainment lawyer who will watch and judge your content for you to obtain your necessary insurance cover. Always tick this box before you put your work before anyone. In particular, a distributor will not fold the bill for any kind of legal proceedings or legal standpoints. So edit done, legal's done. Now, how do we get it in front of the right sales eyes that I was talking about before to get it to market? Now, back to my favorite work again, which is research. Before we look at this point, once again, in the repetitive process, let me briefly address whether we need a sales agent at all. Now, there are many ways to self-distribute and some have succeeded. And once more, that's a whole other talk. So for me to carry on this journey for this talk, I can only cite what we achieved and also the red flags to look out for. So research sales agents and festivals around the world that have track records that will suit the sale and marketing of your documentary. You'll need as many as possible without spreading yourself too thin. You're about to build on the networks you've already carried out previously with either your short film festival appearance or general meet and greets, either virtual or physical. I say meet and greet, even this in virtual world, we can still meet and speak, so to speak. So I'm a big advocate of seeing someone's face. So if you are meeting visually, have them on screen, and never, 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 which is the big no-no, strike or agreeing a deal by email or non-verbal or visual forms of communication. But before we reach out to those deals, there are a few more final important things we need to kind of discuss to be prepared before you make this final leap of faith into that formation sharp pull, and that's trailer and artwork that will boost the appeal of your documentary to any interested parties. Again, you might be thinking, is this not the distributor job? In that fantastic ideal world, it most certainly will be. But in our world of scrapping to the top, we need to cover these bases with content that will heighten your doc's appeal rather than dampen it. A mistake here can be crucial, and this can come from sheer lack of effort by producing nothing at all, or complete lack of know-how where you produce something, present something that may work against you. Tips here are trailer. Now, don't go over 90 seconds at this point. Make it representative. Tell the story, whatever you're selling, and make it ring of that. Now, with DTF, we had controversial and shocking in abundance from a sale point of view. So we concentrated on these elements. Now, I say sales because this is what you're delivering at that point, not ordinarily what the distributor may put out on release. The same can be said as the artwork, as you can see here for DTF. If you deliver something striking to a sales agent, you're doing their job for them, which they tend to love. Now, a sales agent delivering on-point sales materials to distributing teams at any distribution company, it's going to make their eyes light up to the fact that not much work is needed to take on your film. So research again and be smart with the artwork and trailer. And if anyone wants to see the sales trailer, and drop me an email as before mentioned, and I can pop it over to you. In our case, the sales trailer was pretty close to what eventually was put out, which either highlights how lazy distributors can be or how well we put it together. So let's give the poor distributors the benefit of the doubt on this point. So I'm about to morally bash them some more as we delve into the finale of the talk. Now, I generally used lazy on purpose within my last sentence because unless you strike gold, then once again, presume you will be asked to produce all kinds of pieces of material for your distributor. Do not think the work is ever over, even after you receive your first sales report and find out you're number one in the charts. Now, I want to backtrack again a little now to make this final narrative work within the talk and reference the researching sales agents and distributor statements I made. So we've researched and found what we feel is our best options for sales, festivals, and eventual distribution. We introduce them to our tasting materials and they are interested and want to talk more. And we arrive at avoiding the sharp bites and make sure we're dealing with bruises rather than jaws. And sincere apologies to all reputable sales agents and distributors out there. But can we express that this stereotype is certainly not conjured up just by me, but is also from experience by many others. So the nitty-gritty talk. Are sales agents asking for upfront fees? A general rule, they all will try. Now, negotiate. You should have budgeted for this predictable request, but that doesn't mean you should just automatically pay because they're playing out the whole, I've got to cover my cost fallacy at the end of the meal, by the way, that you will have just bought. You've invested in a meal and wine at this point, and more importantly, don't forget, you're still on the quest of fulfilling those calculated promises you made to everyone that have helped you this far. Yet alone, the important and rare investors that are present, you have on side. So with those reminders ringing in your ears, be bold, confident, not forgetting friendly, and ask the questions along the line of, what are the costs? What will they pitch your film? Where will they pitch your film? What is their track record with dealing with certain distributors? Now, you should know the answers to the majority of questions already with all the research you've done on them, but make them relay and explain to you in person to get a true sense of whether this individual company that they represent can be trusted with the work that you and your team have tirelessly built from scratch. Do not lose the drive and determination now at this stage and settle for any deals out of desperation for someone to like your documentary enough to sell it. Potting out on unexplained fees is not the way to go where the world is so digital and offers so many platforms to house your films for very little money, which is unfortunately something a vast majority of sales agents and distributors will opt for after taking money up front. Now, placing it on iTunes and hoping for the best is not something you should accept from any reputable sales agent and distributor. But unfortunately, because of the glut of digital content out there now, this is becoming far too common, which I believe as filmmakers, we need to kind of fight against and be more diligent by being a lot more braver, to be honest, and street smart, as this ever-developing landscape could be the death of all we do. So to agree on deals that aren't beneficial to you, the filmmaker and the investor, we really need to stay clear of. So moving on from my mini rant, we should also be wary of sales agents and or distributors with overtly large catalogues. Just because they have one successful title doesn't mean they will sell your film in the same fashion. Ordinarily, with this example, you will find if that the catalogues are large, then your film is likely to be presented to film market as part of a folder where they might be pushing one film predominantly. Yeah, another pitfall to avoid is agreeing to worldwide selling rights with a sales agent and distributor. Now, unless someone is offering you large sums of upfront money for your investors to richly profit from, then do not agree to worldwide sales rights. You're far better to separate your territories with numerous sales reps and having a worldwide deal that is in the wrong distributor's hands, as this could result in having only a total of 3 clicks on iTunes in all corners of the world, which inevitably will equal an unhappy investor knocking on your front door. Now, this all sounds negative and scary. Well, it's supposed to. That's what shark pools are, and if you're prepared to jump in these waters, then please make sure you're a strong swimmer. And if you're not, get someone who can be. I honestly wish you could sit here and profess that the sales and distributing stage is graced with overtly amazing people who love your film as much as you do. But to do that, I'd be lying to you, to be quite honest. I'm sure there are some amazing individuals, and there are out there pushing boundaries within their field. But again, harping back to the origins of this talk, give yourself the best chance in all aspects of this journey. And at this final hurdle, I can only comment from certain experiences, and that being cynical in the home straight is the safest and best way to approach any negotiations and agreements. And with another repetitive habit that's been aforementioned, if you haven't the skills, again, find someone that has. So you've found your way through the barrier reef with pure cynicism that I've just been championing there badly. With guts and help needed, finally agreed several deals around the world, and through festival screenings and guerrilla marketing, you've pushed your film with everything you can in cohesion with your newly found distributor. Now, I use DTF once more and reinforce, even at this signed, sealed and delivered stage, there is still work to do. And that is to relay the marketing journey that should begin at the pre-deal stage. Now, pretty much 99% of our marketing was done by us, the filmmaking team. So again, get a step ahead, get placements with specific press that will give your film maximum exposure. Know what your film is. Just like in presenting to the sales stage, for instance, we had Unilad, etc., covering DTF, not National Geographic. So again, be smart and research. There's that word again. Who will be specifically interested in giving your doc exposure for your distributors to sell and push. Now, same for festivals. DTF didn't and never would aim itself at somewhere like Venice, etc. It had to go more left field with something like Dances with Films for its premieres to push. So going to help you around the world. So save yourself copious amounts of time and money by applying to the wrong festivals. Touching on this, there is no magic trick to getting into festivals, aside from sporadic nepotism, which is arguably earned or not over the years within some festival circles. All you can do for your debut film is research wisely and make the right impression in the same vein as when you approached investors. Like-minded contributors, sales agents, and distributors alike. If you repeat that ethos of everything you've done to this point, then this will see you over that elusive line of seeing your film grow from that first premiere screening, initial reviews, that first sales report from its first run on a one-off TV deal. Now, talking of sales reports, which, by the way, aren't always roads of reading. So brace yourself and once again, be realistic in knowing what to expect. Anyone making a debut feature documentary for more than 100K, certainly in the UK, should be aware that the numbers are against you in the independent film world. And if you haven't been vigilant at every stage, which I've covered so far, then it could come back to bite you. Circling back to distributors again, no matter how successful, big or small they are, they will look to run costs to suit them on the reports. So factor that into your original projections for everyone concerned with your debut doc. The trick is make your investors a profit. If it's a big profit, then skip down the yellow brick road. But if not, expect small, aim healthy, and continue to gradually line your ducks up so those rare investors don't lose money, which will enable you to get their confidence again and invest in your next bigger and better project. Now, just to finish off, some makers will most certainly get the golden ticket on their first try, but remember that many, many, many more will not. So manage your expectations without diluting your passions and ambitions, obviously. But with this mindset and know-how you've gained along the way from your first film, you also, the also-ran filmmaker with a million ideas, no champagne ticket or Bob Dylan creative genius genetics bestowed within your bloodstream, you'll give yourself the best possible chance in making a career in the world of independent documentary film.